That is disturbing to me. They don't answer the question. They don't put a denial. They put a dismissal on it. That's not the way to treat American citizens. Again, they may in fact be complying with the statute because Congress, I don't think some of them read this. They talk about if you're not in compliance, and again, all 56 jurisdictions are, you couldn't use a Virginia driver's license or one from Michigan if you're from Michigan to get on an airplane. That's not correct. When you actually read the regulations, they say 25% of the population already holds a valid passport, and the Department of State anticipates this figure will go to 33% in the next few years. Individuals with valid passports do not need to obtain a real ID, as passports are likely to be accepted for the same official purposes, i.e. boarding commercial aircraft. A military ID card will also get you on the airplane. So this is not correct to say that you have to have this. So what is the real purpose of passing this law? This creates more concern, not less. And the only instance, in fact, of a person attempting a terrorist act after 9/11 was, in fact, from Richard Reed, this terrorist who was flying from Paris, France to Miami. I think it was on a Monday in December. He was denied the ability to board the airplane. Why? Because he was acting strange and he could not answer questions. The next day he came back. He boarded the airplane. You know why he boarded the airplane? He had an authentic, verifiable British passport that properly belonged to him. He was properly identified. He was a proper terrorist. So folks, you know, this is not necessarily the answer what they want to do. Sniffing dogs, chemical analyzers, metal detectors are reasons, and taking your shoes off are more important, I think, than this real ID. Let me read you this here. Domestic violence victims are going to be subject to unfortunate scrutiny and maybe danger because of the Real ID law. A state legislature would not have done this. Why? Because we deal with the application of these things. Congress has no knowledge of this. I'll shorten this. Response to the concerns about domestic violence victims. The Real ID Act, and they're correct, does not include any exceptions for victims of domestic violence not to provide their full legal names. Now, Congress apparently doesn't mind putting domestic violence victims at jeopardy of their lives or their property or their personal safety because they had some goal that they had up here. That is not the way to treat American citizens. There is another circumstance, says here, I'll just go to the response that DHS has. The Real ID Act does not provide DHS with authority to prohibit third-party private sector uses of the information stored on the Real ID card. DHS is not aware of any current plans by federal agencies to collect and maintain any of the information stored in the MRZ, magnetic reading zone. The federal agency should decide to use the MRZ to collect and maintain personally identifiable information. Any such information collected will be subject to protection of the Privacy Act. It is not necessarily what is going on now with the request from DHS. It is what can happen, what can be authorized, that the real danger is there. So the statute that Senator Cuccinelli and I have says, look, because we are complying with proper security measures to identify people. DHS happens to have those as criteria. If the governor determines, or DHS, or Department of Motor Vehicle determines, that when they make a request and they can't guarantee the security information, they are not to give that information to any federal agency, and we will go to court over that. That's what this does. So it says, Congress, as long as you don't bother us, we're fine, because we're going to be very prudent in Virginia and issue identification cards properly. But if you can't guarantee the safety of any information, biometric data, they've not asked for a retinal scan, but they could. They've not asked for a fingerprint, but they could. They're not asking for that now. Why? Because they're lulling some people to sleep. And in fact, the response from the states, I think, has gotten the attention of some people in DHS. Why? Because the hub that they want to set up, first, will not be accessed, supposedly, by the federal government. It'll only be accessed by a policeman from Montana checking somebody from a DMV in Missouri. That's a response to the reaction from the states saying, no, hell no, and never to what you want to do with this card. We need to get Congress's attention again, and in Virginia saying, you're not going to compromise our personal security or our personal financial information, So you go up and tell those folks up there to support my bill and Senator Cuccinelli's bill. Thank you very much for coming.
Hold on. One thing I wanted to mention. You talk about fighting. This gentleman's been fighting for years as a legal fight in court. In fact, he's the one who took that HB 3202 to court. So let's give Pat McSweeney a great
Thank you, Ed. You may not know that right up there is the Attorney General of Virginia. That's where the legislators are. I'm going to ask you to voice some support for these two men, if you will. I'm going to ask you a question, and if you agree with me, I want you to shout yes. Do we support these two bills?
Yeah!
Remember, tell Bill Howell we need another piece of legislation to memorialize Congress to repeal dangerous ID. Thanks for being here. And let's thank, by the way, I've asked Bob, Donna will put what Bob was just saying. It was much too much for us to absorb. We can use some of that to testify. It'll be up on www.virginialibertydefense.org. And Donna says there will be DVDs available of today's remarks. Prepare your statements. Let's get up there and tell the legislators to do what's right. Thanks again. Thank you.